Hi everyone. I welcome for this video session. The topic is cluster analysis of big data analytics. The cluster analysis is used for automatic identification of natural grouping of things. So this is also known as a segmentation technique. By knowing some input values, we should segment the specific regions. So usually cluster means it is a group of objects that belongs to the same class. In other words, we can say similar objects are grouped into one cluster and dissimilar objects can be grouped into some other cluster, like that also we can say. So in this technique, all the data instances that are similar to each other, means each other, are categorized into one cluster. Similarly, data instances that are very different from each other, they are moved into different clusters. And clustering is an unsupervised learning technique, as there is no output or dependent variables for which a right or wrong answer can be computed. So the correct number of cluster or the definition of those cluster is not known ahead of time. So without knowing the input values, without having some input values, simply by assuming some initial values, all the things should be clustered together. That is unsupervised learning technique, it says. So you can see this how we can make the cluster like a group of clothes, group of kid items, group of electronic items, and we can make it into, say, Amazon sales. So this is a central clustering technique. Usually in the hierarchical clustering technique, there is suppose consider electronic items. There are a number of electronic items like televisions, mobile phones, and some other remote controls, and also tape recorders or VCD players, and all the electronic items are, we can divide again into mobile phones and televisions, laptops, like that. So in that mobile phones, again we can cluster into, it is a collection of various companies like Samsung, Micromax, and some other mobile phones like Nokia. So those things are combined together into make a one cluster called mobile phones. Mobile phones, televisions, laptops, all together be made as one cluster electronic items. So the clustering techniques can only suggest to the user how many clusters would make sense from the characteristics of the data. The user can specify a different larger or smaller number of desired clusters based on their making business sense. So the cluster analysis technique will then define many distinct clusters from analysis of the data based on the data. So with cluster definitions for each of those clusters. However, there are good cluster definitions are there depending upon how closely the cluster parameters fit the data. The cluster of data objects can be treated as one group actually. While grouping the cluster analysis, we first partition the set of data into groups based on data similarly, and then assign the labels to the groups. The main advantage of clustering is over classification is that it is adaptable to changes and helps single out useful features that distinguishes different groups. Clustering analysis is broadly used in many applications such as market research, pattern recognition, data analytics, image processing. You can see cluster analysis. So many applications are there. Cluster analysis used in almost every field where there is a larger varieties of transactions. So it helps to provide a characterization, definitions, and labels for the population. It can help identify natural grouping of customers, products, some patients, and so on. So it can also help identify outliers in a specific domain and thus decrease the size and complexity of problems. A prominent business application of cluster analysis is the main is market research. So in a market research, customers are segmented into cluster based on their characteristics, their wants and needs, geography, price sensitivity, and so on. So cluster can also help some marketers discover distinct groups in their customer base, and they can characterize their customer groups based on the purchasing patterns. So in the field of, suppose if we consider biology, it can be used to derive plant, suppose, and animal taxonomies, categorizing the some genes with the similar functionalities, and also gaining some insight into structures inherent to populations. So clustering also helps in identification of areas of similar land using an Earth observation database. So it also helps in the identification of groups of houses in a city according to house type, value, and geographical location. So, like that, we can say some of the applications market segmentation. In the market segmentation, it is categorizing customers according to their similarities, for instance, by their common wants and their needs and so like that. Product portfolios, there people of similar sizes. It can be grouped together to make a small, medium, and larger size of clothing items. In the text mining, clustering can help organize a given collection of text documents according to their content similarities into clusters of related topics. With the respect to the definition of cluster, suppose like if you take a representation of n number of objects, suppose a k number of groups based on the measure of similarity, such that objects within the same group are alike, but the objects in different groups are not alike. So cluster can different terms of their shape, size, and density. Clusters are patterns, and there can be many kinds of patterns. So some clusters are the traditional types, such as data points hanging together. However, there are the other clusters, such as all points representing the circumferences of circle. So as a data mining function, cluster analysis serves as a tool to gain insight into the distribution of data to observe some characteristics of each cluster. There are so many requirements of clustering. There scalability, some ability to deal with different kinds of attributes, discovery of clusters, high dimensionality. All those things are which are always used in are requirements of clustering in data mining. Okay, so like this, we can make the clusters. What is cluster? How we can form a cluster? What is the usefulness of clusters in real life? Okay, okay. Thanks for this watching this video.